Hey y'all, tonight we tumble straight into the crumbling, chaotic heart of ancient Rome's slums. You're not waking up to birdsong, a gentle sunrise, or even the dull hum of traffic. No, you're jolted awake by the shrill squawks of gulls fighting over last night's garbage, the echo of distant shouting, and the unmistakable aroma of, well, let's call it urban bouquet. You blink, trying to orient yourself, but your eyes sting from the dust and smoke drifting through the open window. You're lying on a straw-stuffed mattress, scratchy and suspiciously damp, in a room barely wider than your outstretched arms. The walls are so thin, you can hear your neighbor's stomach growling, and you're pretty sure he can hear yours too. You probably won't survive this, but hey, let's see how far you get. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your new home is an insulae, a multi-story apartment block that looks like it was designed by someone who'd never heard of building codes. You're on the 5th floor, which sounds fancy until you realize it's the cheapest, most dangerous spot in the whole structure. These buildings go up 6, sometimes 7 stories, but the higher you live, the more likely you are to plummet to your doom when the inevitable collapse happens. Historians still argue whether the average insula lasted more than a decade before crumbling, but you're not feeling optimistic as you listen to the wood beams creak under your weight. The walls are a patchwork of mismatched bricks and crumbling plaster, with cracks wide enough to let in the city's infamous rats, who, by the way, have zero respect for personal space. You can see daylight through the gaps, and the only thing keeping you from tumbling out is a rickety shutter that's more decorative than functional. Your window overlooks a narrow alley where the sun barely reaches and the ground is slick with something you hope is just rainwater. You try to stretch, but the ceiling is so low you nearly knock yourself out. There's no privacy here. Families of 6 cram into rooms this size, and you're sharing yours with a stranger who snores like a dying gladiator. The air is thick with the scent of sweat, mildew, and last night's boiled cabbage. If you're lucky, you'll find a lizard or two scuttling across the floor. Free pest control, if you can catch them. As you shuffle to the door, you notice the staircase, a spiral of uneven stone steps, slick with grime and worn down by thousands of desperate feet. There's no railing, so one wrong step and you're on a first-name basis with the ground floor. The building sways ever so slightly with the wind, and you wonder if it's your imagination or if the whole place is actually leaning. Spoiler, it's not your imagination. You hear a commotion outside. Someone's arguing about bread prices, or maybe someone's stolen a chicken again. The walls do little to muffle the chaos. You think about breakfast, but the thought of eating anything in this place makes your stomach turn. Still, hunger wins out, and you rummage through a basket of stale bread, hoping for a bite that isn't too hard to chew. Fun fact, the Romans often soaked their bread in wine or water just to make it edible. You consider dunking yours in the puddle by the window, but decide you're not quite that desperate. Yet, there's a constant, low-level anxiety here. Every creak, every shout, every gust of wind feels like a warning. You remember reading that Emperor Augustus once tried to regulate building heights in Rome because so many insulae collapsed. But whether those laws were enforced is anyone's guess. Historians still debate how many people died in these collapses, but the numbers aren't comforting. You glance around your room, taking in the cracked pottery, the threadbare blanket, and the single battered oil lamp that provides more smoke than light. You spot a cockroach making a beeline for your breakfast and decide to let him have it. You're not that hungry after all. You wonder how anyone could live like this day after day, year after year. The answer, of course, is that most people didn't. They just survived, one precarious sunrise at a time. And as you gather your courage to face the day, you can't help but marvel at the sheer resilience or stubbornness of Rome's poorest citizens. You're already longing for your own bed, your own bathroom, your own 4 solid walls. But for now, you're stuck here, in the heart of the ancient world's most infamous neighborhood, with nothing but your wits, your questionable breakfast, and a growing sense of dread. You shuffle toward the door, bracing yourself for your first real challenge of the day: waste disposal. Forget about flushing toilets or even the humble outhouse. Here in Rome's slums, your morning ritual involves a chamber pot, a window, and a prayer that no one is walking below. The pot is heavy, sloshing ominously as you lift it. You try not to think about what's inside, but your nose has other plans. The stench is so sharp, it almost feels physical, like it's crawling up your nostrils and settling behind your eyes. You lean out the window, glance downward, and see the alley is already streaked with suspicious puddles and splatters. You hesitate. There's a reason Roman law technically forbids tossing waste out the window during daylight hours. But let's be honest, enforcement is about as reliable as your building's foundation. Some say the law was more about keeping the wealthy clean than protecting the poor. Historians still argue whether these rules were ever followed or if they were just wishful thinking from senators who never set foot in neighborhoods like yours. With a deep breath, you tip the pot and hope for the best. Somewhere below, a voice erupts in angry Latin. You freeze, then slowly close the shutter, pretending you heard nothing. Welcome to the ancient Roman version of out of sight, out of mind. You think about the city's infamous Cloaca Maxima, the massive sewer system that's supposed to keep things tidy. But here in the slums, you're lucky if your waste ever makes it that far. Most alleys double as open sewers, and the smell is a permanent resident. The streets are slick with a mixture of rainwater, refuse, and things you'd rather not identify. You try to step carefully, but your sandals squelch with every move. As you make your way downstairs, you pass neighbors carrying their own pots, faces twisted in disgust. One woman mutters about the good old days when at least the rats were smaller. You wonder if that's true or just nostalgia talking. Fun fact, Romans sometimes used broken pottery shards called pessoi as toilet paper. You spot a pile of them by the stairwell and make a mental note to avoid touching anything with your bare hands. The communal latrine is at street level, a dark, damp room that smells like it's been fermenting since Romulus founded the city. You peer inside and see a row of stone seats with holes cut into them. Underneath, a sluggish stream of water tries and fails to carry away the mess. There's a communal sponge on a stick, resting in a bucket of equally questionable water. You shudder. You've heard the stories. Sometimes, the pressure in the sewers builds up and sends a jet of foul water straight back up through the seat. The locals call it the devil's kiss. You decide to hold it in a little longer. Outside, the street is already buzzing with life. Vendors shout over each other, hawking everything from wilted vegetables to suspiciously gray meat. Children dart between carts, their faces smeared with grime and mischief. You dodge a donkey cart and nearly step into a fresh pile of something best left unnamed. The air is thick with the mingled scents of sweat, rot, and desperation. You wonder how anyone can get used to this, but the locals barely seem to notice. Maybe you think your senses will dull eventually, or maybe you'll just lose your appetite for good. You glance up at the buildings towering overhead. The insulae lean precariously, their upper stories jutting out over the street like drunken giants. Laundry flaps from every window, dripping onto the heads of passers-by. You spot a child dangling a stuffed rag doll from a sixth-floor window, giggling as the wind tugs at its legs. You silently hope she doesn't drop it, or herself. A neighbor sidles up beside you, clutching his own chamber pot. He grins, revealing a mouthful of teeth in various stages of decay. "First time?" he asks, nodding toward your pale face. You nod back, trying to look braver than you feel. "Don't worry," he says. "You get used to it, or you move to the forum and pretend you're better than us." He laughs, a harsh, barking sound that echoes down the alley. You force a smile, but your stomach churns. You think about modern plumbing, about the luxury of a private bathroom and hot running water. Here, the best you can hope for is a quick trip to the latrine before the next explosion, or before someone else's pot comes flying down from above. You wonder how anyone survived long enough to build an empire, let alone conquer half the world. Maybe it's true what they say. Necessity is the mother of invention. Or maybe Romans were just too stubborn to die. As you edge away from the latrine, you catch sight of a group of children playing a game with a dead rat and a stick. You decide not to ask about the rules. The sun is climbing higher, baking the waste in the streets and sending up fresh waves of odor. You pull your tunic over your nose and try to breathe through your mouth, but it doesn't help much. The city is alive in the most pungent way possible. You steel yourself for the next ordeal, knowing that this is just the beginning. The day has barely started, and already you're questioning your life choices, assuming you live long enough to make any more. You step out into the alley, sandals squelching, and realize your next mission is a basic one. Find drinkable water, not the kind that's tinged with mystery floaties, but something that won't send you sprinting back to the communal latrine, if you're lucky enough to make it in time. The Roman aqueducts are legendary, sure, but here in the slums, you're a long way from the sparkling fountains that senators and poets rave about. Most of those marble masterpieces are off limits to the likes of you. Instead, you join a line at a battered public spout where the water trickles out in a thin reluctant stream. The crowd is restless. Everyone clutches their own battered jug, eyeing each other with suspicion. You overhear a heated debate about whether the aqueducts are carrying more water or more disease this week. Historians still argue whether the ancient Roman water supply was a miracle of engineering or a public health disaster waiting to happen. You're leaning toward disaster as you watch a dog relieve itself a few feet from the queue. The odor is enough to make you reconsider your thirst, but dehydration is a luxury you can't afford. Finally, your turn comes. You fill your jug and peer inside. The water is cloudy, swirling with bits of grit and something that might be algae or might be worse. You remember reading that Romans sometimes flavored their water with vinegar or herbs to mask the taste. You eye a nearby stall selling posca, the infamous sour wine vinegar mix favored by soldiers and the poor. It smells like salad dressing left out in the sun, but you're tempted. Anything to disguise the flavor of urban runoff. You take a cautious sip and instantly regret it. The water is lukewarm, metallic, and faintly salty. You try not to think about the lead pipes that snake through the city, leaching their own special seasoning into every drop. Fun fact, while some claim Roman lead poisoning was overblown, others insist it contributed to everything from madness to the empire's downfall. Historians still debate whether the average Roman drank themselves silly on lead, or if the real culprit was just plain old bacteria. You trudge onward, water jug in hand, navigating the labyrinth of alleys and side streets. Every step is a negotiation with the ground. Is that puddle just rainwater or something more sinister? You learn quickly to step where the locals step, avoiding the slickest patches and the piles of refuse that seem to multiply overnight. The city's waste management system is impressive on paper, but here you're living in the footnotes. You pass a fountain, its basin choked with wilted flowers, coins, and what looks suspiciously like a dead pigeon. A group of children splash their feet in the water, giggling and shrieking as they chase each other around the rim. You consider joining them. After all, a little fun never hurt anyone, right? Then you remember the communal sponge and decide to keep your shoes on. You spot a woman scrubbing vegetables in a bucket of water drawn from the same fountain. She catches your eye and shrugs. "It's better than nothing," she says. "At least it's wet." You nod, not entirely convinced. You recall that Romans sometimes used snow or ice imported from the mountains to cool their drinks, if they could afford it. Here, you're lucky if your water doesn't come with a side of dysentery. The market is a riot of noise and color, but the smell of rotting produce and spoiled fish keeps your appetite in check. Vendors shout over each other, hawking everything from bruised apples to suspiciously lively eels. You spot a barrel of garum, the infamous fermented fish sauce that Romans poured over everything. The aroma is so powerful, it nearly knocks you backward. You wonder if it's strong enough to disinfect your water. Probably not, but it might at least distract you from the taste. You pause at a stall selling clay cups and jugs, each one more chipped than the last. The vendor grins, revealing a gold tooth a rare luxury in these parts. Best cups in Rome, he boasts. Holds water, wine, or whatever else you find. You consider buying one, but your coin purse is as empty as your stomach. You settle for a free whiff of the merchandise and move on. As you make your way back toward your insula, you notice a group of men arguing over a broken pipe. Water gushes into the street, forming a muddy river that snakes through the alley. One man curses the city officials, another blames the gods, and a third suggests they just fill their jugs and be grateful. You watch as they scoop up the water, mud and all, and wonder how anyone survives here without growing gills. You finally reach your building, jug in hand, feeling like you've completed an Olympic event. You take one last look at your prize and sigh. It's not much, but it's all you've got. You take a tentative sip, grimace, and remind yourself that survival in ancient Rome is less about comfort and more about lowering your standards again and again. And as you climb the stairs, careful not to spill a drop, you realize you're already longing for a cold, clear glass of water from your own kitchen tap. But for now, you'll settle for not getting sick, at least not today. You haul your precious, slightly murky water up the stairs, but before you even reach your door, the city's true assault begins. Not on your body, but on your senses. Rome's slums are a full contact experience for your nose, ears, eyes, and even your skin. You step into the hallway, and the air hits you like a slap, a swirling cocktail of sweat, spoiled food, animal droppings, and the ever-present tang of burning refuse. It's so thick you could almost chew it if you were into that sort of thing. You're not. You pause, trying to breathe through your mouth, but that only makes things worse. The taste of the air is something between old garlic and wet leather. You wonder if this is what it's like to live inside a compost heap. Historians still argue whether ancient Romans were truly nose-blind to their city's stench, or if they simply had no choice but to embrace it. Either way, you're not there yet. You catch yourself gagging and try to play it cool, but your eyes are already watering. The noise is relentless. Every wall and window is a thin barrier against the chaos outside. Street vendors bellow their wares. Children shriek as they chase each other through alleys. And somewhere, a pair of drunks are singing what might be a love song or a declaration of war. You can't tell. Over it all, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoes, punctuated by the braying of donkeys and the distant roar of the city's public games. The city never really sleeps, it just changes tempo. Sleep here is a suggestion, not a guarantee. You try to focus on something pleasant, but even the sights are overwhelming. The walls are streaked with soot and graffiti, some of it surprisingly artistic, some of it just crude jokes about the emperor's mother. Fun fact, ancient Romans loved graffiti, and some of their jokes were so bad they'd fit right in on a modern bathroom stall. You spot a crude drawing of a gladiator with the words "Marcus can't fight" scrawled underneath. Poor Marcus. The ground beneath your feet is sticky in places, slick in others. You glance down and see a trail of ants marching purposefully toward a crack in the wall. You wonder what they know that you don't. A cat slinks past, pausing to glare at you as if you're the intruder here. Maybe you are. You duck back into your room, hoping for a moment of peace, but the air inside is just as thick. Your roommate is awake now, complaining about the neighbor's cooking. "Smells like boiled rat again," he grumbles. You're not sure if he's joking. You hear a commotion from the alley. A vendor's cart has tipped over, sending a cascade of rotten vegetables into the gutter. The vendor is cursing, the children are cheering, and someone's dog is making off with a suspiciously green cabbage. You try to clean yourself up, splashing a little water on your face. It doesn't help. The grime is stubborn, clinging to your skin like a second, less pleasant tunic. You spot a louse crawling along your sleeve and flick it away, shuddering. You remember reading that lice and fleas were constant companions in ancient Rome, no matter your social class. Historians still debate whether the wealthy really suffered less, or if they just had fancier ways to scratch. You open the shutter for some fresh air, but the only breeze carries the scent of burning hair. Someone nearby is singeing the feathers off a chicken, and the smell is unmistakable. You close the window quickly, but it's too late. The odor lingers, mixing with the other scents until you can't tell where one ends and another begins. You try to distract yourself with the sounds outside. A woman is singing as she sweeps her doorstep, her voice surprisingly sweet amid the chaos. You catch snatches of a familiar melody, something about lost love and cheap wine. It's oddly comforting, even if you can barely hear it over the din. You sit on your bed, trying to acclimate. Your skin itches, your eyes sting, and your ears ring from the constant noise. You wonder if you'll ever get used to this, or if you'll just develop new allergies. You remember that quirky tidbit about Roman perfumes. Some people wore little bags of herbs around their necks to mask the city's odors. You consider fashioning your own, maybe with a sprig of rosemary or a handful of mint, if you can find any that hasn't been trampled. Your roommate starts humming along with the woman outside, and for a moment, the noise blends into something almost musical. You close your eyes and try to imagine you're somewhere else, anywhere else, but the city won't let you forget where you are. A sudden crash from the alley snaps you back to reality. You sigh, resigning yourself to another day of sensory overload. And as you lie back on your scratchy mattress, you realize this is just the baseline. The real challenges haven't even started yet. You're still breathing, still upright, but you're not sure how much longer you can last, with every sense under siege. Welcome to Rome, where even your nose needs nerves of steel. You're only halfway through the morning when you realize that living in a Roman insula is less like having a home and more like playing a never-ending game of will it collapse. The walls creak ominously every time someone stomps up the stairs, and you swear you can see dust trickling from the ceiling with each heavy footfall. If you thought modern apartment living was noisy, try sharing your building with 100 people, several goats, and a chicken that seems to have a personal vendetta against sleep. You glance at the wooden beams overhead, noting the alarming sag. Historians still argue whether most insulae were built to last or just thrown up as quickly and cheaply as possible. Judging by the way your floorboards bounce, you're betting on the latter. The city's population has exploded, and landlords are more interested in squeezing tenants into every available nook than in basic safety. The higher your room, the cheaper the rent, and the greater the risk that you'll wake up on the ground floor, whether you plan to or not. Suddenly, a commotion erupts below. Someone shouts fire, and panic ripples through the building. You freeze, heart pounding. Fires are the slum dweller's worst nightmare. With open flames used for cooking and lighting, and buildings packed so tightly you can touch your neighbor's wall from your own window, a single spark can turn the entire block into a death trap. You remember reading that Rome's most infamous fire, the Great Fire of 64 CE, started in neighborhoods just like this. Historians still debate whether Nero really fiddled while the city burned. But one thing's certain, when a fire starts here, you run. You grab your few belongings, your water jug, a crust of bread, and the tunic on your back, and join the stampede for the stairs. The smoke is already seeping in, stinging your eyes and throat. The stairwell becomes a bottleneck as neighbors shove and shout, each desperate to reach the street first. You're jostled from all sides, nearly losing your footing on the slick, uneven steps. Someone drops a basket and its contents, apples, a wooden spoon, a terrified mouse, scatter underfoot. You finally burst into the street, coughing and gasping for air. The crowd spills out around you, faces streaked with soot and fear. You look back and see flames licking at a window 2 floors above yours. The fire spreads with terrifying speed, leaping from one wooden balcony to the next. A bucket brigade forms, but the water is scarce and the flames are relentless. You join in, passing buckets hand to hand, but it's clear you're fighting a losing battle. The heat is intense, driving you back. You hear a crash as part of the roof gives way, sending sparks and debris raining onto the street. The crowd surges again, dragging you away from the burning building. You stumble over a fallen neighbor, help him to his feet, and keep moving. There's no time to mourn lost possessions or worry about where you'll sleep tonight. Survival is the only goal. As the fire burns itself out, you join the other displaced tenants, huddled in the shadow of a nearby wall. The city's vigils, Rome's version of firefighters, arrive at last, but their efforts are too little, too late. You watch as they poke through the smoldering ruins, searching for survivors and dousing the last stubborn embers. Someone mutters that the landlord will just build another insula on the same spot, even flimsier than the last. You wonder if you'll be desperate enough to move back in. A neighbor offers you a swig of wine, and you accept gratefully, savoring the sharp burn in your throat. You share a laugh. What else can you do? As someone jokes that at least the rats will have to find a new home. You remember that quirky tidbit about Roman insurance. There wasn't any. If your home burned down, you started over with nothing. Sometimes, the city would offer emergency shelter in temples or public baths, but mostly, you were on your own. You sit on the curb, watching the smoke drift into the sky, and realize that in ancient Rome, disaster is just part of the daily routine. The city is always rebuilding, always teetering on the edge of catastrophe. You wonder how anyone finds the courage to keep going, knowing that everything they own could vanish in a heartbeat. Maybe it's stubbornness, or maybe it's just the Roman way. Shrug, rebuild, and hope the next insula holds together a little longer. As the sun climbs higher, you brush ash from your tunic and stand. The day isn't over, and you still have to find a new place to sleep. You glance back at the ruins of your home, then forward to the bustling, indifferent city. Rome moves on, and so must you. One more lesson learned. In the slums, your home can become your tomb at any moment, and survival means never getting too comfortable. You wander away from the charred skeleton of your old insula, stomach rumbling and nerves frayed. The city doesn't pause for personal tragedy. Hunger is a constant companion here, and you're already scanning the street for your next meal. The markets of Rome's slums are a far cry from the marble-clad forums you've seen in movies. Here, the stalls are slapped together from broken crates and sun-bleached cloth, and the air is thick with the scent of desperation and something that might be old fish. You drift toward a vendor shouting about fresh bread, but fresh is a generous term. The loaves are rock hard, their crusts chipped and pitted like ancient ruins. You pick one up and knock it against the table. It sounds like a gladiator's helmet. The vendor grins, missing several teeth, and assures you it's just baked. Historians still argue whether the poor in Rome ate better than peasants in the countryside, but as you gnaw on a corner, you're pretty sure the answer is not today. Next, you spot a heap of vegetables, turnips, onions, and something unidentifiable that might once have been a carrot. The colors are muted, the leaves wilted. You remember that quirky tidbit about Roman food. Even the rich masked the taste of spoilage with spices and sauces. For the poor, the solution is simpler. Just eat quickly and hope for the best. You eye a bowl of olives swimming in cloudy brine and decide you're not that brave yet. The fishmonger's stall is impossible to miss, thanks to the pungent aroma of garum. This fermented fish sauce is the Roman answer to ketchup, and they pour it over everything: bread, beans, even fruit. You watch as a customer douses a hunk of stale bread in the stuff, grimacing as he chews. You muster your courage and ask for a taste. The flavor is memorable, salty, sour, and so intensely fishy that your eyes water. You wonder if it's supposed to taste like this, or if you've just sampled a batch that's been fermenting since Julius Caesar was a boy. You move on, passing a butcher's table where cuts of meat hang in the open air, buzzing with flies. The vendor waves a branch to shoo them away, but it's a losing battle. You notice a slab of pork with a greenish tinge and decide to stick with bread. Nearby, a woman sells bowls of lentil stew, thick with mystery ingredients. You ask what's in it, and she shrugs. "Whatever I had left," she says. You take a cautious bite. It's bland but filling, and you're grateful for the warmth. As you eat, you overhear a heated debate about the price of grain. Food riots aren't uncommon here. When the grain supply falters, tempers flare. Historians still debate whether the Roman grain dole, the annona, actually kept the peace or just made the poor more dependent on the state. All you know is that today you're on your own. A child tugs at your sleeve, offering a handful of dried figs in exchange for a sip of your water. You trade, and the figs are surprisingly sweet, a rare treat in a diet dominated by starch and salt. You spot a group of men huddled around a pot of boiled cabbage, sharing jokes and passing a jug of sour wine. You join them, grateful for the company and the distraction from your growling stomach. Someone tells a story about a man who tried to pass off donkey meat as lamb. The punchline is lost in the laughter, but you make a mental note to be suspicious of any meat that tastes a little too gamey. You remember reading that Romans sometimes soaked spoiled meat in vinegar or wine to disguise the flavor. You wonder how many people got sick anyway. The market is alive with barter and banter, but underneath it all is a constant anxiety. Will there be enough to eat tomorrow? You watch as a vendor packs up early, his stall picked clean. You realize that for many here, hunger is a daily threat, and every meal is a small victory. You finish your stew, wipe your hands on your tunic, and thank your new friends. As you wander away, you spot a woman selling what she claims is honey cake. You buy a piece, savoring the rare sweetness, and decide that maybe, just maybe, you can handle another day in Rome's slums. If you don't think too hard about what's in your next meal, you drift from the market, sticky with honey, and still hungry for something more filling and safer. But there's no time to linger. The streets are shifting, the crowd thickening as the day heats up. You're jostled between a pair of burly men arguing over a spilled basket of beans, and it's suddenly clear food isn't the only thing you have to worry about in these neighborhoods. Here, the real game is survival, and everyone's playing for keeps. You clutch your meager belongings close, eyes darting from face to face. The social stew of Rome's slums is as unpredictable as the weather. Senators' sons, slumming it for a thrill, brush shoulders with runaway slaves, pickpockets, and hustlers. Historians still argue whether the rigid Roman class system ever truly broke down in these crowded streets, or if everyone just pretended not to notice when someone's toga was a little too clean or their accent a little too refined. You're not here long before you get your first lesson in street smarts. A boy no older than 10 bumps into you, hard. You check your pouch, heart racing. It's still there, but you're not fooled. You keep a tighter grip. The boy flashes a gap-toothed grin and disappears into the throng. You try to look unbothered, but your nerves are on high alert. Fun fact: the Romans had a whole vocabulary for thieves. Furtum for petty theft, latro for highway robbery, and cutpurse for the nimble-fingered kids who haunt the markets. You spot a group of men huddled in a doorway, eyes scanning the crowd. They're not watching for bargains. You recognize the look, predators sizing up prey. You walk a little faster, blending in as best you can. Nearby, a woman shouts at a man who's just snatched her basket. He vanishes into an alley before anyone can react. The crowd barely pauses. This is just another Tuesday. A commotion breaks out near the edge of the forum. 2 men are fighting, fists flying, over what looks like a battered loaf of bread. A small crowd gathers, egging them on. You edge away, remembering that quirky tidbit about Roman law. Technically, assault is a crime, but justice here is more about who can shout the loudest or swing the hardest. Historians still debate whether the city's famous urban police, the cohortes urbanae, made any real difference in the slums. or if they just kept the peace in the wealthier districts. You pass a tavern, its door hanging crooked on its hinges. Laughter and raucous singing spill into the street, along with the sour reek of spilled wine. Inside, a dice game is in progress. You watch as a young man loses his last coin, then storms out, muttering curses. You're tempted to step inside for a moment's peace, but you remember the stories. Taverns are magnets for trouble, and more than one unlucky soul has stumbled out minus their purse or their teeth. You weave through the crowd, careful to avoid the groups of young men lounging on corners. They eye you, sizing you up. You keep your head down, pretending to be invisible. It almost works until you hear a shout behind you. You don't look back. In Rome's slums, curiosity is a luxury you can't afford. You slip into a quieter alley, heart pounding. Here, the buildings lean so close together, you can touch both walls at once. The shadows are deep, and the air is cooler. You pause to catch your breath, listening to the distant hum of the city. You hear footsteps behind you, and tense, but it's just an old woman shuffling past, arms full of laundry. She gives you a knowing look, as if to say, "Keep moving, kid." You do. As you emerge back into the sunlight, you realize that you're not just fighting hunger or filth. You're fighting for your place in a world where everyone is desperate and the rules change by the hour. You wonder how anyone manages to build a life here, let alone a future. Maybe that's why so many turn to crime or cling to tiny scraps of status wherever they can find them. You glance down at your tunic, stained and rumpled. You're nobody here, just another face in the crowd. And for now, that's exactly how you want it. You keep your head down as you wind through the maze of alleys, but eventually, nature calls, loudly and without mercy. You scan the street for options, but there's no privacy in the slums, and certainly no personal bathroom. Instead, you follow the steady stream of people heading toward the communal latrine, a structure that's more infamous than inviting. As you approach, the smell hits you first, a wall of odor that nearly stops you in your tracks. You steel yourself and step inside. The public toilet is a long, low stone bench with holes cut at regular intervals, perched above a sluggish channel of water. There's no partition, no door, and certainly no dignity. You take your place among the others, trying not to make eye contact. It's a strange sort of camaraderie. Everyone here is equally desperate, equally resigned. You remember the mainstream fact that Rome's public toilets were marvels of engineering for their time, with running water to carry waste away. But here, in the slums, the running part is more theoretical than actual. You glance around for toilet paper, but of course, there isn't any. Instead, there's the infamous communal sponge on a stick resting in a bucket of murky water. You hesitate, eyeing the sponge with deep suspicion. Fun fact, Romans called this a tertiorium, and it was shared by everyone who used the latrine. You try to convince yourself that the water in the bucket is at least changed daily, but the color suggests otherwise. Historians still argue whether the tertiorium helped prevent disease or just spread it faster. You're not eager to find out firsthand. You do your business as quickly as possible, all the while praying that the rumors about sewer explosions are just urban legends. But then you hear a sudden gurgle, followed by a whoosh of foul-smelling air from the channel below. The man next to you jumps up, cursing, and you realize the stories are true. Sometimes the pressure in the sewers builds up and sends a jet of filth right back up through the seat. You clench every muscle and prepare for the worst. But today, you're lucky. You finish, clean up with the tersorium as best you can, and vow to drink less water tomorrow. As you step outside, you're hit by a wave of relief and a fresh appreciation for modern plumbing. You make a mental note to never take toilet paper for granted again. You watch as a line forms at the entrance, a mix of children, laborers, and elderly women, all waiting their turn. You wonder how many people get sick from using these facilities, but you already know the answer. Too many. You wander back into the street, still feeling a little queasy. A group of children dart past, laughing and jostling each other. One of them carries a stick, waving it like a sword. You realize, with a shudder, that it's a discarded tersorium. You make a wide detour around them, deciding that some games are best left unplayed. You pass a water cellar, hawking cups of dubious liquid for a few coins. You're tempted, but the memory of the latrine is still too fresh. You spot a man washing his hands in a trickle of water from a broken pipe, scrubbing furiously as if he can erase the city's grime. You join him, splashing water over your hands and arms, but the feeling of filth lingers. You remember that quirky tidbit. Some Romans believed that certain gods watched over the latrines, protecting users from evil spirits and presumably from sewer surprises. You silently thank any deity who might be listening for your narrow escape. Historians still debate whether these superstitions made people feel safer or just gave them someone to blame when things went wrong. You continue down the street, feeling lighter, but also a little more vulnerable. There's no such thing as privacy here. Every bodily function is a public affair, every embarrassment shared. You wonder how anyone keeps their dignity intact, but maybe that's the secret. You don't. You just survive, one awkward, smelly moment at a time. You catch up with your roommate from the insulae, who gives you a knowing grin. First time, he asks. You nod, and he laughs, clapping you on the back. Don't worry, you'll get used to it, or you'll stop caring. You're not sure which is worse. As you walk away, you glance back at the latrine, its stone benches, already filling up again. You realize that, for all its horrors, it's a vital part of life here. A place where everyone, rich or poor, must eventually go. And in that, at least, you're all equal. Well, almost. You're determined to shake off the memory of the communal latrine, so you decide to pursue a little self-care. In ancient Rome, that means a trip to the public baths, a daily ritual for everyone from senators to slaves. But don't get your hopes up for a spa day. In the slums, the baths are less luxurious retreat and more petri dish with columns. Still, you join the stream of locals heading toward the nearest balcony, clutching your threadbare towel and a sliver of soap that's seen better centuries. The bathhouse is a squat, soot-streaked building, its entrance flanked by faded frescoes of gods and athletes. Inside, the air's thick with humidity, laughter, and the unmistakable tang of sweat. You're hit by a wave of body heat and the earthy aroma of 100 unwashed Romans. The changing room is chaos. Tunics piled on benches, sandals kicked underfoot, and a cacophony of voices debating everything from chariot races to the price of beans. You undress quickly, trying not to stare or be stared at. Privacy isn't a thing here, and you're soon swept along with the crowd into the tepidarium, the warm room. The stone floor is slick with water and something less identifiable. You shuffle to a corner, clutching your soap like a talisman. Historians still argue whether the baths were truly egalitarian, or if the wealthy found ways to keep the poor at arm's length. Here, everyone's packed together, and you're grateful for the anonymity. You move to the caldarium, the hot room, where steam billows and sweat pours from every pore. The heat is overwhelming, but you welcome it until you notice the water. It's cloudy, tinged with a suspicious greenish hue, and floating with bits of who knows what. Fun fact, the water in public baths was rarely changed, and bathers often entered with open wounds or skin conditions. You try not to think about it as you splash yourself down, scrubbing quickly and avoiding eye contact with a man who's picking at a suspicious rash. You hear a group of men debating the latest gladiator match, their voices echoing off the tile. Someone cracks a joke about the emperor's new mistress, and laughter ripples through the room. You almost forget where you are until a sharp pain reminds you that the floor is littered with tiny stones and possibly lice. You shift your feet and try to focus on the ritual. Scrape off the grime, rinse, and get out before you catch something new. You move to the frigidarium, the cold plunge, bracing yourself for the shock. The water is icy, but it's the cleanest you've seen all day, probably because no one wants to linger. You dunk yourself quickly, gasping, then scramble out, grabbing your towel and heading for the exit. As you dry off, you notice a sign warning bathers not to spit in the water. Judging by the state of the pool, it's a rule honored more in the breach than the observance. Outside, you feel almost human again, until the city's grime settles back onto your damp skin. You watch as a group of children splash in a puddle by the curb, their laughter infectious. You remember that quirky tidbit. Some Romans believed that bathing too often could make you weak or sickly. You're not sure if you agree, but you do know that you'll never take a hot shower for granted again. You catch up with your roommate, who's drying his feet on a patch of grass. Feel better? He asks. You nod, though you're not convinced. The itch on your arm suggests you've picked up a new souvenir, maybe a flea, maybe something more exotic. Historians still debate whether the baths were a public health miracle or a breeding ground for every disease under the sun. You head back toward your insula, feeling cleaner but also more vulnerable. The baths are a social equalizer, a place where everyone, rich, poor, free, enslaved, rubs shoulders. But they're also a reminder that in Rome, even the simplest pleasures come with risks. You wrap your towel tightly, grit your teeth, and prepare to face the rest of the day. hoping you'll make it to tomorrow without catching anything you can't pronounce. You're barely dry from the bathhouse when your roommate nudges you and says it's time to earn your keep. In the slums, nobody gets to lounge around, not unless they want to go hungry. You follow him down a narrow alley, past vendors hawking wilted greens and a man selling what he claims is genuine Egyptian relics. It's just broken pottery. The air is thick with the scent of sweat and something acrid, like vinegar, left out in the sun. You're headed to the Phalonica, the neighborhood laundry, but don't picture a row of shiny washing machines or even a cheerful washboard. Here, laundry is a grimy, backbreaking business. The Fullers, Rome's professional clothes cleaners, work in open courtyards, stomping on tunics and togas in ankle-deep vats of urine. Yes, you heard that right. Human urine. It's collected from public urinals and chamber pots, prized for its ammonia, which helps break down stains. You wrinkle your nose as you approach, but your roommate just shrugs. You get used to it, or you lose your sense of smell. The foreman, a burly man with forearms like tree trunks, hands you a bundle of filthy linens. Stomp, he grunts, pointing to the nearest vat. You roll up your tunic and step in, the warm, reeking liquid sloshing around your ankles. It's a sensory experience you'll never forget and hope never to repeat. You start stomping, trying not to think about what's squishing between your toes. Fun fact, Roman fullers often sang work songs to keep rhythm and distract themselves from the smell. You hum a tune, but it does little to lift your spirits. Around you, workers scrub, stomp, and wring out garments with practiced efficiency. The air is thick with steam and the sharp tang of ammonia. You catch snippets of conversation, gossip about a neighbor's affair, complaints about rising grain prices, a heated debate about whether the emperor's new tax will ruin everyone. Historians still argue whether fullers were respected tradesmen or looked down on for their smelly profession. All you know is that your skin is starting to itch and you're desperate for fresh air. After stomping, the clothes are rinsed in water that's only marginally cleaner than the wash vats. Then comes the sulfur. Fullers use it to bleach white garments, filling the air with choking fumes. You cough, eyes watering, as a cloud drifts your way. Your roommate laughs, clapping you on the back. Breathe through your mouth, he advises. Or just don't breathe at all. You take a break, stepping aside as a cart rolls in with another load of laundry. The owner, a wealthy matron, inspects the workers with a critical eye. She wrinkles her nose, but says nothing. She needs her togas cleaned after all. You remember that quirky tidbit? Some fullers became surprisingly wealthy, even influential, because everyone in Rome needed clean clothes. Still, you doubt anyone here feels like a big shot. You watch as a young boy hauls a bucket of urine from the street, struggling under its weight. He trips, spilling some on his sandals, and the other workers jeer good-naturedly. You wonder how many children spend their days in places like this, breathing fumes and handling filth. Historians still debate whether child labor was as widespread in Rome as in later centuries, but here it's hard to imagine otherwise. The day drags on, your feet pruning in the vats, your hands raw from scrubbing. You fantasize about quitting, But you know the alternative is hunger. You try to focus on the rhythm. Stomp, scrub, rinse, ring. You catch yourself humming again, the tune blending with the chorus of voices around you. As the sun dips lower, the foreman finally calls it a day. You stagger out of the vat, legs aching and skin tingling from the chemicals. You rinse off as best you can, but the smell lingers, clinging to your skin and hair. Your roommate grins. "You smell like a real Roman now," he jokes. You're not sure whether to laugh or cry. You trudge home, exhausted and reeking, but oddly proud. You survived another day's labor in the heart of Rome's slums. Barely. You wonder what tomorrow will bring and whether your feet will ever feel clean again. You limp away from the Fulonica, feet shriveled and skin tingling, but you don't get far before the next threat makes itself known. It starts as a cough from the woman sweeping her stoop, then a chorus of sneezes from the children playing in the gutter. You realize disease is everywhere, lurking in the air, the water, and every handshake or shared cup. In the slums of ancient Rome, you're not just dodging crime and collapsing buildings. You're running a daily gauntlet of illness. You pass a cluster of neighbors huddled around a sick child, his face flushed and eyes glassy. Someone mutters about bad air and sprinkles a pinch of incense on a nearby brazier, hoping to ward off evil spirits. You remember the mainstream historical fact. Romans believed in the miasma theory, thinking foul smells carried disease. Historians still argue whether this belief helped or hindered public health, but you're pretty sure that burning rosemary isn't going to stop the next outbreak. You cough into your sleeve, suddenly hyper-aware of every ache and sniffle. The streets are crowded, and personal space is a foreign concept. You squeeze past a man hawking lozenges made of honey and herbs, his answer to everything from sore throats to heartbreak. You're tempted to buy one, but your coin purse is nearly empty, and you're not convinced it'll do much good. You spot a group of women drawing water from a public fountain, their buckets clanking. One of them dips a cloth in the water and presses it to her forehead, wincing. You remember that quirky tidbit. Some Romans believed that tying a live toad to your body could cure a fever. You're not ready to try that, but you do notice that the water is tinged with something green and suspicious. You decide to wait until you're truly desperate before taking another sip. As you wander, you hear whispers of a new sickness sweeping through the neighborhood. Some say it started in the tanneries. Others blame the foreigners who arrived on the last grain ship. The truth is, nobody knows. Historians still debate whether ancient plagues were caused by bacteria, viruses, or something else entirely. All you know is that the fear is real, and it spreads faster than the illness itself. You duck into a bakery, hoping for a moment's respite. The baker, a gaunt man with a hacking cough, offers you a crust of bread. You accept, trying not to think about where his hands have been. You chew slowly, eyeing the other customers. Are they sick or just tired? It's impossible to tell. You hear someone mention the plague, and the room goes quiet. Everyone glances at the door, as if expecting Death himself to stroll in for a snack. You step back outside, the sun already dipping low. The city feels tense, the usual chaos muted by a sense of dread. You pass a healer's stall where a woman sells potions and charms, snake oil, you suspect, but hope is in short supply. A line has formed, everyone desperate for a cure, or at least a little reassurance. You remember reading about the Antonine Plague, which devastated Rome in the 2nd century. Some say it killed millions. Others think the numbers are exaggerated. Historians still argue over the true impact, but for the people living through it, the fear was as real as any fire or famine. You wonder if you'd have the strength to keep going, day after day, surrounded by sickness and uncertainty. As you make your way home, you notice a funeral procession winding through the street. Mourners carry torches and scatter flower petals, their faces solemn. You step aside, bowing your head. Death is a constant companion here, never far from anyone's door. You climb the stairs to your insula, every muscle aching. You lie down, pulling your threadbare blanket tight, and listen to the city's uneasy silence. You realize that in ancient Rome, survival isn't just about dodging danger, it's about enduring the ever-present shadow of disease. You close your eyes, hoping that tomorrow brings better health, and maybe a little less coughing. You wake from uneasy sleep, your throat scratchy, and your dreams haunted by the sound of coughing. But the city is already alive with a different kind of noise. Laughter, music, and the clatter of dice. If you want to forget your troubles, or just escape the constant threat of disease and disaster, there's only one place to go: the taverns and brothels of Rome's slums. Here, entertainment is less about pleasure and more about distraction, sometimes desperate, sometimes dangerous, always unpredictable. You follow the crowd as dusk falls, the city's shadows growing longer and the air thick with anticipation. The tavern you choose is a ramshackle affair, its sign swinging precariously above the door. Inside, the room is hot, smoky, and packed with bodies. The tables are sticky, the benches creak, and the floor is littered with olive pits and broken dreams. You squeeze into a corner, clutching a cup of sour wine that tastes like vinegar with a grudge. Around you, the regulars are already deep into their cups. A group of laborers argue over a game of knucklebones, slamming the dice down with theatrical flair. A woman with a voice like gravel sings bawdy songs, her laughter echoing off the cracked plaster. You remember the mainstream fact that Roman taverns were notorious gathering spots for the city's lower classes, places where news, gossip, and trouble all flowed as freely as the wine. Historians still argue whether these establishments fueled social unrest or simply offered a safety valve for the city's frustrations. You watch as a brawl erupts near the bar. Two men arguing over a spilled drink, their voices rising until fists fly. The crowd barely reacts. Fights are a part of the entertainment, and the barkeep only intervenes when someone threatens to break a valuable jug. You edge away, careful not to draw attention. Fun fact: some Roman taverns had back rooms for gambling, and the stakes could be anything from coins to a night's lodging, or even your freedom if you gambled unwisely. A serving girl winks at you, offering a plate of dubious stew. You take a bite, trying not to think about the ingredients. The flavor is strong with garum, masking whatever else might be lurking in the bowl. You wash it down with another gulp of wine, feeling the warmth spread through your limbs. For a moment, you almost forget where you are. The door swings open, and a group of soldiers swagger in, their armor clinking. The mood shifts. Some patrons tense, others cheer. The soldiers buy a round for the house, and the singing grows louder. You remember that quirky tidbit. Brothels and taverns often shared the same building, and the line between entertainment and exploitation was thin at best. You spot a staircase in the back where painted women beckon to passing customers. You look away, feeling a mix of curiosity and discomfort. You hear a heated debate at the next table. Someone claims to have seen a famous gladiator in the market, while another insists it was just a butcher with good biceps. The argument dissolves into laughter, and you realize that for all the hardship, Romans know how to squeeze joy from even the bleakest circumstances. Historians still debate whether the city's poor found true happiness in these moments, or if it was just a way to forget their troubles for a few hours. You lose track of time as the night deepens. The wine flows, the music swells, and the line between friend and stranger blurs. You dance with a stranger, share a joke with a pickpocket, and watch as a poet stands on a table to recite verses about love and loss. The crowd jeers and throws olive pits, but the poet bows with a flourish, unbothered. As the tavern empties, you step outside into the cool night air. The city is quieter, but not safe. You hear shouts in the distance, the clatter of hooves, and the soft, sad song of a woman sweeping her doorstep. You realize that in Rome's slums, entertainment is a lifeline, a way to survive the darkness, if only for a night. You head home, your head spinning, grateful for the brief escape. Tomorrow, the struggle begins again, but tonight, at least, you remember what it feels like to laugh. You stagger into the street, the taste of sour wine still clinging to your tongue, and realize that night in Rome's slums is a whole new ordeal. The city transforms after sundown. The crowds thin, the laughter fades, and a different kind of energy creeps in, one that prickles the back of your neck and makes you wish you could lock your door, if you even had a lock. The darkness is thick, broken only by the flicker of oil lamps and the occasional torch carried by a patrol. You hug the wall, moving quickly, every shadow a potential threat. You're not alone in your unease. Even the locals, hardened by years of living here, move with purpose after dark. You pass a group of women hurrying home, heads down, arms linked. A pair of men loiter in a doorway, voices low and eyes sharp. You remember the mainstream fact that Roman cities had a night watch, the vigils, tasked with keeping order and putting out fires. Historians still argue whether the vigils were effective protectors or just another gang to be bribed. Tonight, you don't see any uniforms, and you're not sure you trust them if you did. You slip into a narrow alley, hoping to shortcut to your insulae. The darkness is almost total, and your footsteps echo off the close-set walls. You hear a scuffle behind you, a sharp cry, then silence. You keep moving, heart pounding, telling yourself not to look back. Fun fact, the Romans had a whole vocabulary for nighttime criminals: footpads, cut purses, burglars, and even lamp snatchers who'd steal the very light out of your hand if you let them. You pass a shuttered shop where someone is sleeping, curled up in the doorway, wrapped in a ragged cloak. You envy their ability to rest, even in this chaos. You skirt around a pile of refuse, nearly tripping over a stray dog gnawing on a bone. The air is colder now, and every sound seems magnified. The distant clatter of hooves, the muttered curses of a drunk, the sudden sharp whistle of someone signaling to a friend or an accomplice. You reach the main street where a few taverns are still open, their doors spilling light and noise onto the cobbles. A group of young men, emboldened by drink, swagger past, singing a bawdy tune. One of them bumps into you hard. You mutter an apology and keep moving, not wanting to draw attention. You remember that quirky tidbit. Some Romans believed that evil spirits prowled the streets at night and would hang protective amulets or paint phallic symbols on their doors to ward them off. You wish you had a handful of those charms right now. You finally spot your insula, its outline looming against the starless sky. The building looks even more precarious in the dark, every shadow a reminder of its fragility. You hesitate at the door, listening for any sign of trouble. All seems quiet, but you know better than to let your guard down. Historians still debate whether most crimes in ancient Rome happened at night or if day offered just as many dangers. Either way, you're not taking chances. You slip inside, climbing the stairs as quietly as you can. Every creak and groan of the wood makes you wince. You pass a neighbor sitting on the landing, sharpening a knife. He nods at you, eyes wary. You nod back, grateful for the unspoken understanding. In the slums, everyone looks out for themselves, but a little mutual respect goes a long way. You reach your room, heart still racing. You bolt the door with a piece of wood. It won't stop a determined intruder, but it's better than nothing, and sink onto your mattress. Through the thin wall, you hear voices, someone arguing, a baby crying, the soft murmur of a lullaby. The city never truly sleeps. It just hides its dangers in the dark. You lie awake, listening to the sounds of the night. Every footstep, every whisper, every distant shout keeps you on edge. You wonder how anyone ever feels safe here, or if they just learn to live with the fear. Maybe that's the real secret of Rome's slums. You survive not because you're brave, but because you're too stubborn to give up. As sleep finally claims you, you promise yourself you'll be even more careful tomorrow. In the slums, nightfall brings fresh horrors, but somehow you've made it through another day. You drift into a restless sleep, but it's not the peaceful kind. In the slums of ancient Rome, night is a test of endurance, not a time for dreams. Your mattress is a lumpy sack of straw, scratchy and alive with the faint tickle of something moving, probably lice, possibly worse. You try to ignore the sensation, pulling your threadbare blanket tighter, but the room is alive with the soft skitter of tiny feet. You freeze, listening. Rats, lots of them. You turn over, careful not to disturb your roommate, who's already snoring with the resigned exhaustion of someone who's seen too many nights like this. The walls creak and groan, the wood swollen from years of damp and neglect. Every so often, a chunk of plaster drops from the ceiling, dusting your face with grit. You cough quietly, not wanting to wake anyone, but the sound is lost in the chorus of nocturnal life. Rats gnawing, neighbors arguing, a baby wailing somewhere down the hall. You remember the mainstream fact. Roman insulae were notorious for their shoddy construction and frequent collapses. Historians still argue whether most tenants lived in constant fear or just accepted the risk as part of daily life. You're not sure which camp you belong to, but you know you're not sleeping soundly. The building groans with every gust of wind, and you wonder if tonight will be the night the whole place comes crashing down. You try not to think about it, but the thought lingers, persistent as the scratching in the walls. You pull the blanket over your head, but it does little to muffle the noise or the smell. The air is thick with the mingled scents of sweat, mildew, and something sour, maybe spoiled wine, maybe worse. You remember that quirky tidbit? Some Romans believed that sleeping with a laurel wreath under your pillow would ward off nightmares and evil spirits. You wish you had one now, or at least a pillow that wasn't flat as a paving stone. You shift, trying to find a comfortable position, but the mattress sags beneath you, threatening to dump you onto the floorboards. You listen to the rats scurrying overhead, their claws tapping a frantic rhythm. You wonder how many of them are sharing your room and how many are just passing through on their way to the next crumb. You remember stories of rats gnawing through food stores, even biting sleeping children. You pull your blanket tighter, willing yourself to think of something else. Outside, the city is quieter, but never silent. The occasional shout drifts up from the street, followed by laughter or a crash. Somewhere, a dog barks, answered by another in the distance. You hear the steady drip of water from a broken pipe, the sound oddly soothing amid the chaos. You close your eyes, trying to focus on the rhythm, but the building shifts again, and you jolt awake, heart pounding. You glance at the ceiling, tracing the cracks that snake across the plaster. You wonder if you should move your bed, just in case. But there's nowhere safer. Every corner of the room is just as precarious. You sigh, resigning yourself to another night of half sleep and constant vigilance. You remember that quirky tidbit. Some Romans kept a lamp burning all night, believing it would keep away both thieves and spirits. You wish you had enough oil to try it. Your roommate stirs, muttering in his sleep. You envy his ability to rest, even in these conditions. You wonder how anyone manages to get up and face another day after nights like this. Maybe that's the real miracle of Rome, not the aqueducts or the roads, but the sheer stubbornness of its people. You drift in and out of sleep, dreams haunted by the sounds and smells of the slums. You wake with a start as a loud crash echoes through the building. Just a neighbor dropping a pot, you hope. You close your eyes again, counting rats instead of sheep, and pray that the walls hold for one more night. Morning arrives, not with a gentle sunrise, but with the jarring chorus of city life, vendors bellowing, carts rattling, and the unmistakable sound of someone already arguing about bread prices. You blink awake, body aching from the hard mattress and restless night. As you sit up, you catch your reflection in a cracked bit of polished metal, hair wild, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, skin smudged with the city's grime. This is not your best look, but it's the Roman slum standard. You stretch, feeling every bruise and bite, and realize how much your 21st century body is struggling. Your stomach growls, but you hesitate before reaching for the bread you stashed under your blanket. You remember last night's rats and check for nibbles? Just a few, nothing too alarming. You brush off the crumbs and take a tentative bite, jaw working overtime to chew through the rock-hard crust. You stand, wobbling slightly, and peer out the window. The city is already in motion, the streets below a swirling mass of bodies, animals, and noise. The air is thick with the scent of smoke and sewage, and you cough reflexively. You remember the mainstream fact. Ancient Rome was a marvel of engineering, but the slums were a world apart, a daily battle for survival. Historians still argue whether the average Roman slum dweller was more resilient than we are today, or simply had no other choice. You think about the day ahead, another round of labor, another trip to the market, another cautious journey through streets teeming with danger. Your muscles ache from yesterday's work at the Phalonica, and your feet are still tender from hours spent stomping in urine vats. You glance at your hands, raw and cracked, and wonder how long you'd last before illness or injury took its toll. You remember that quirky tidbit. Some Romans believed that eating a garlic clove each morning would ward off sickness and evil spirits. You consider trying it, but decide your breath is already enough of a weapon. You smile at the thought. Sometimes a little humor is the only shield you have. You gather your few belongings, tying your coin purse tight and tucking it beneath your tunic. You steel yourself for another day, knowing that every step outside is a gamble. The city is unforgiving, and the slums even more so. You wonder how anyone managed to build a life here, let alone thrive. Maybe that's the biggest difference between you and the Romans. They didn't just survive, they adapted, endured, and found moments of joy amid the chaos. You look around your tiny room, at the cracked walls and sagging beams, and realize how much you take for granted in your own life. Clean water, safe shelter, a bed that doesn't bite back, luxuries you'll never overlook again. You feel a strange mix of gratitude and awe for the people who called these slums home, who faced each day with grit and determination. As you step out into the street, blending into the crowd, you know one thing for sure. You wouldn't last a day in ancient Rome's slums, not without a lot of luck, a little cunning, and a stomach of iron. But for the people who lived here, it was just another day, another chance to survive, another story in the endless saga of the city. Now, as the city's noise fades behind you, let your breath slow and your body settle. Picture yourself stepping away from those crowded, chaotic Roman streets, the dust and clamor growing softer with every step. The air cools, the smells recede, and the weight of ancient hardship lifts from your shoulders. You're back in your own room, safe and clean, the hum of modern life, a gentle lull in your ears. Let your muscles relax, remembering that even the hardest days in history had to end, that even the most restless nights eventually gave way to dawn. Imagine the ancient city shrinking behind you, its worries and dangers dissolving into the distance. The rats, the crumbling walls, the endless noise, all fading, replaced by the soft comfort of your own bed. With each breath, feel yourself growing lighter, the tension melting away. You've traveled far tonight, seen how resilience and stubborn hope carried people through the darkest of days. Let that strength settle in your bones, not as a burden, but as a quiet reminder. You're safe, you're strong, and you're home. The world outside is calm now. The lights dim, the air cool and gentle. Let your eyelids grow heavy, your thoughts drift, and your body sink into the mattress. The stories of ancient Rome can wait until tomorrow. For now, you deserve rest, peace, and the soft embrace of sleep. Good night, traveler. Dream easy, and remember, you're tougher than you think, but you don't have to prove it tonight.